This week I'm going to talk about bad guy triggers. This is mostly for maybe security personnel and loss prevention, but if you're a private investigator, if you ever have or anticipate working on hit skip auto accidents, you're going to find some stuff in here that's valuable for you as well. Hi, this is Larry K with ShadowAnyone.com, the creator of the Investigator's Ultimate Guide series and a bunch of other training over there. Much of it is free, not paid training, although there's plenty of that. But I've got something like 350, 380 videos and articles over at Shadow Anyone, all keyword searchable. If you're interested in something, type it in there, and I'm sure something will come up in our industry, security and investigations. This week, the idea of triggers for bad guys comes up because of a comment I got in one of the videos that I was teaching. And it was a guy who had worked loss prevention. He said that as he was approaching the theft suspect who had walked out of the store, the theft suspect turned and swung on the loss prevention officer. The loss prevention officer instinctively moved or ducked or swung back. But the problem was he had already had the handcuffs in his hand, and when he came around, it scratched or scarred minimally the bad guy's face. And the bad guy turns around, of course, and going to sue. He sues the place. And the commenter said, you know, all we had to do was just show the theft, the blatant, obvious concealment on video to the judge, and the case was thrown out. Now, I can argue both sides of this, and in public, I'm not going to argue and explain to bad guys some of the things that they should have thought about or mentioned in their lawsuit. But let's talk about it from the good guy point of view. When I worked loss prevention and used handcuffs, and there were just hundreds of cases like that, what I would suggest is don't have your cuffs out until you have some sort of control over your subject. For two reasons. One, you're kind of probably going to want both hands in case you got to lay hands on the guy, move him, address him, direct him, or defend yourself. I like to have my hands free for that. Certainly, if you have a pair of cuffs, a lot of times the instinct is to pull them with your strong hand, and now you've lost that punching, blocking, primary blocking hand, that kind of thing. So for one, I would say wait until you have at least some control over the suspect. People fight like crazy sometimes, and you may have no more control than just being on top of them and tiring them out. But to get a hold of a wrist or to get one hooked up and then bring it around, that may be all the control you have initially. So don't have the cuffs out. The thing is, though, and where this comes into today, talking about triggers, having those cuffs out, that can be a trigger for the bad guy. And I don't know about this case in particular, and I am not second guessing this guy who was working LP. I don't do that. I think Monday morning quarterbacking is no. So it's just not my job. It's not most people's job. If you're in a prosecutor's office, feel free to pick over what a guy did. But other than that, forget about it. So having the cuffs out, the bad guy sees those cuffs, and immediately, a lot of times there can be just a no, we are not doing that. And then it's on. If you approach someone with bare hands, the cuffs are hidden, completely out of view, the bad guy, even some die-hard bad guys, their first thing might not be to go to that violence. Because the first thing they think is they can lie to you. After all, they're doing a shoplifting, a theft where they're trying to be sneaky rather than an outright robbery somewhere. So they're thinking, okay, I don't have anything on me. Oh, that, I paid for it. I have my receipt. I gave it to my girl. They know they've got some wiggle room, or they think they've got some wiggle room, right? And that allows you as an experienced professional to manipulate and hold the situation as you need for everybody's safety and to get a good, clean apprehension out of it. See, one thing you have to remember is this person may have a lot of experience with theft. They may steal a lot. And if it's drug related, it's every day, multiple times a day, I'm sure. What you also have to take into consideration is that the loss prevention officer has way more experience in apprehending somebody. So whereas this guy may steal every day, he only gets caught once or twice a year. The loss prevention officer probably has hundreds of apprehensions under his or her belt with that experience. And again, that allows us to know ahead of time what some of these triggers are and to adjust for them, like keeping the cuffs concealed. Another trigger that I would run into when I worked loss prevention was as we were bringing people back in, there was an archway that led to where our loss prevention office was. There was an archway. On the right was a fitting room. On the left was a stockroom door. And then when you went back into stockroom, there was the loss prevention office behind another door in there. It wasn't even going through the door into the stockroom that was the trigger for a lot of people. It was when they hit that archway and they realized that this is it. I can't, they've got me. When you do it enough and you know what that trigger is, prepare for that, think about that, and adjust accordingly. Now, that's really handy for loss prevention people to know. Security people, probably not taking people into custody like that so much, but you also know your area, your place. You know that there's a certain alley you have where people go and smoke dope, or you know that there's behind these dumpsters, everybody goes back there and causes trouble. So you know the places, and it's when you work jobs like this, I'm surprised frequently that total random unconnected strangers will find the same use for the same space. It's just an oddity of human nature that we see certain things and we react in certain ways. So when you work security, you'll know your area. You'll know what geography and what things you have there that trigger certain behaviors. Let's step into the private investigation world where you might be doing accident investigations. And specifically, I want to talk about hit skips. If you see these in real life, you'll see that there are two basic types. If you're investigating in hindsight, you'll see them as well when you look at, say, nearby surveillance video, or if the phones come out after impact, that type of thing. Now, most of the world, all of the world, and certainly law enforcement, divide hit skip accidents, auto accidents, into two categories, those with injuries and those with just property damage. Those are the two categories, and that's immediately what 911 is going to want to know about. You as an investigator, or maybe even as a security person on the scene or a witness, let me divide these into two different categories. Hit skips. Most people, of course, will stick around for an accident. They're a decent person. It's an accident. This is the societal covenant we have with each other. We stick around and we own what we did. When it is a hit skip, when they hit a vehicle and then they take off, two different categories. Number one, the people who immediately flee the scene. Number two, the people who stick around for a few minutes and then they flee. Either way, this is why it's really important to get a license plate number right away. It's probably the first move in my view, because you can do that even before you're assessing for injuries, even before anything else. With the people who flee right away, a lot of times it will initially look like they're not fleeing. Maybe they're just backing their vehicle out of the intersection or something like that, but they're moving their vehicle for a reason. You think of it as a decent person, like, oh, they're just trying to get out of the way of traffic, but they are preparing to flee. They're getting free from the wreckage and getting ready to take off. So that license plate is very, very important. Of course, they can be running with we call counterfeit tags, bogus tags, but you'd be surprised how many times a skilled investigator can turn that around and figure out, wait a minute, the brother-in-law, this tags are still associated with this guy somehow, some way. Okay, the second type of person, and this comes back to our triggers that I'm talking about, the second type of person on a hit skip that sticks around for a few minutes then takes off, the reason they do this, and you may not know this if you're just viewing security footage from like a nearby store or something like this, but watch carefully. Here's what happens. They're scared. They don't understand. What did I do? Especially, I see this mostly with like striking a bicyclist or a pedestrian or something like that. They care. Oh my gosh, is this person okay? Here's the trigger. It's when they hear the sirens arriving. When the medics are a few blocks still off, they hear those sirens, and the driver is fearful, and then they flee. Not because they're a bad person, but because they're really scared. Now, they've just made their whole predicament 100 times worse. They've taken something that was a traffic accident and turned it into a crime at that point. But That's the trigger. When those sirens start to sound. So if you're on the scene, beware. Know that as the sirens come from a distance, that may be a trigger for the person you're dealing with. There are all sorts of triggers and specialties in our world. If you want to share some, feel free to share them. If you're interested in looking at ways to handle different triggers and different problems, my book, 51 Weird Private Investigator Tricks That Actually Work, I suppose if you look at it from the perspective of triggers, you might find a couple or a few in there besides the 51 things that are good to know. Like one thing in there I teach about is the trigger when people are read their rights. They're read their Miranda rights. What can you do to keep them talking? And that I explain in there. So, in the meantime, this is Larry K with shadowanyone.com. Remember, do the right thing, even if it's the hard thing.